Hello! Happy Wednesday, everybody. My two biggest fans, first two, Ben Moody, Jane Hardy. Just remembered I didn't put the last one on YouTube, so while we're waiting. Hi Jack! Hope you've had a nice few days. I saw your pictures on Mrs. Moody's assembly this morning. Looking good. It is very, very hot. Oh, maybe I did put Mondays on. No, I didn't put Mondays on. Oh, hi Tom! Thank you, Ryan. I have to wear a hat when it's sunny because I have a very sensitive scalp when it gets burnt, so I always wear a hat if I'm out in the sun. Tom and Ryan, I hope you're both okay and have had a nice few days. Okay, I think we will get started. So I'll just do our usual quick recap. Oh, they did the tattoos, didn't they? They gave themselves tattoos. And made a they swore, didn't they, to keep the place a secret and that they'd never tell anybody. That was it. So that's where we got to. Tom, yeah, 1 week until your cast's off. I bet you're so excited, and in this weather I bet it's such hard work having a cast. I bet it gets all sweaty and hot, and I don't blame you for being excited to get it off. Glad you're okay, Ryan. Okay, so this chapter is called Explore a School. Some nice illustrations. Okay, let's start. The next day was Thursday, a full 12 days since the crash. 12 days? It doesn't seem like it's been, like they've been in the jungle for like weeks. Fred was woken from a nightmare about a burning aeroplane by the vulture pecking at the back of his head. He sat up. "Hey," he said. The vulture looked at him, an irate glare of disdain for the slack of a world that had failed it. "Heel!" came a voice from outside, followed by a whistle. The vulture waddled out of the stone room. Fred followed. "Good boy," said the explorer to the vulture, tussling its naked red head as if it were a dog. The fire outside the stone room had already been lit. "Wake the others," said the explorer. "It's only just sunrise," said Fred dubiously. "Max sometimes threatens to pee on you if you wake him up early." "Wake him anyway. If he chooses to weaponise his urine, so be it. I've been watching you all, and there are some basic techniques for survival that you don't yet know. I'll be working late today, so you need to listen now." He glanced down at Fred's palm and saw the mark. He said nothing, but it was possible, Fred thought, that the left side of his face smiled half an inch. "Come, hurry! Explorer School is in session." He's turning quite nice now, isn't he, the explorer? The others emerged, rubbing their eyes. The explorer handed out pieces of meat from a gourd cut into a serving bowl. "To get home, you need to know both the river and the land. Tell me what you know." It was hard to say what the meat was. A bird, Fred thought, though it might have been fish. He ate as slowly as he could, chewing each piece until it turned to pulp in his mouth. "We already know the river quite well," said Con proudly. "We came on a raft." "Describe it." "Fred made it," said Con. She grinned at him. Her cheek was covered in mosquito bites, but her smile was broad. He was fanatical about it. "What did you use?" the explorer asked Fred. Fred described it as best he could. He tried not to sound too proud of it. "It sounds a good design," said the explorer, and Fred felt his face burn hot with pleasure. "I came along the Negra by raft from Manaus on one of my first expeditions. I used a similar model, not as good as a dugout canoe, but quicker to make." "What was the expedition looking for?" asked Fred. "Various things. Some of the men were looking for a city, others for plants for a new medicine. I was just hungry to see the world. We were naive and clumsy. 2 men died, but I loved it." The explorer began sketching a map in the dust. "You come this way, round the edge of the rapids by Dead Man's Point, and north. Water leaping up into your face, the raft trying to ride the waves by the way you would a horse, and me trying to make sure that the bamboo rod I used to steer didn't jerk and impale me through the ribs. Some of the happiest days of my life." He handed out more meat. Max widened his eyes in appeal and was given double. Con opened her mouth to object and then closed it again. "You'll have to do part of the same journey I made before you reach the city. It will be choppy, foam and rocks. You can get thrown up several feet in the air, so you'll have to tie the little one on. If anyone falls overboard, they can't grab onto the raft in those waters without capsizing it." "Really?" said Lila. "But couldn't you—" "No," he said sternly. "The only honourable thing to do is drown." "Oh," said Lila. "Oh," said Fred. "Fine," said Con. "What else?" "And there are certain preparations you must make. Have you got a pen?" They didn't, of course, but Lila took a flint and began to scratch into a piece of grey stone. "In the forest, 50 miles down from here," said the explorer, adding to the dust map, "you'll come across a kind of bee. It's absolutely minuscule and rather beautiful. It's drawn to sweat and to moisture, and it's happiest when nesting on the centre of the pupil of your eye. The people there call them eye lickers. Write that down." "Eye lickers," said Lila, scratching hard. There was no fear in her face, only concentration. Backer climbed on top of her head and sat there, an inquisitive hat. "The best thing to do is wear a bit of net over your eyes." "Could we make netting?" asked Fred. "That's a good question. It's one of the very few things that is almost impossible to make." "Could I—" Fred closed his eyes and tried to picture what the net would need to look like. "Punch holes in a bit of snakeskin?" "Well, you could." The explorer looked at Fred, nodding slowly. "That's not a bad idea, in fact, but finding snakeskin is difficult in these parts. The vultures eat them. I have 1 mosquito net. It's the most valuable thing I own, I think." They waited. "I suppose I can cut off 4 pieces, and you can tie them round the backs of your heads with vines." "Thank you," said Fred and Lila together. "That's kind," said Con solemnly. "See, he is turning nice. He's being nice to them. That's his most prized possession. He's going to share it with them." The explorer waved it away, frowning, unexpectedly awkward in the face of gratitude. "And then the vampire bats." He added further lines to the map and some spikes to show hills. "You need to find a way to deal with them." Con looked up. Please, please tell me that's a joke. Not at all. They come in swarms, not around here, but on the other side of the mountain. You must have heard of them. No, said Con. Fred hadn't either. But Lila will have, he said. I've never seen one, said Lila, but their front teeth are sharper than razors, and their tongues give off a chemical that stops your blood from clotting. Quite, said the explorer. It's all very impressive from an evolutionary point of view, but very frustrating from a personal one. Frustrating? Said Con. Bats that eat you are frustrating? They don't eat you, dear child. They drink you. I can assure you there's a difference. When you strike round the mountain, you need to be wary of maggots. Maggots, said Con. The skin on her face was lurid white. Yes, it's unpleasant to think of yourself as the kind of person maggots choose to associate with, but there you are. There was a disconcerting moment many years ago when a maggot worked its way out of my skin. It poked its head up out of my body like a meerkat rising from a hole. It was extremely surprising. I'll teach you how to extract them with a thorn and some fire. Remind me. Lila wrote maggots on the list and added a question mark. The explorer looked at them appraisingly. You should go soon, you're nearly ready. Fred stared at him. Somehow the news did not fill him with the relief it should have. You should go before the rains. You can fish now, Fred knows how to set a trap. With that and the tarantulas and some berries, you should survive. The maggots get worse during the rains, but the going is much slower when the ground is boggy. And there's yellow fever, of course. Oh, of course, said Con. She sounded a little hysterical. Maggots aren't enough without a fever turning you yellow. It sounds like a proper holiday. The explorer ignored her. And when you get back to the city, when they ask how you found your way, you must lie. We'll say whatever you want, said Con. And no matter how many people ask, you don't mention my name. Do you understand? We don't know your name, Con pointed out. What is it, so we know what not to say? The man gave a rumble, half anger, half amusement, deep in his throat. He rose and hefted the vulture into his arms. I'll be working today. If you try to come behind the vine wall again, I'll feed your little toes to the vulture, yes, we know. What was the meat? Asked Fred as the explorer turned to go. It was good. What? Oh, caiman, he said. The one in the lake. So when they all had to run out of that lake when they were fishing because there was a big caiman, he went back and killed it. Hi, Miss Potter. That night, Max came and tugged at Fred's foot. Fred, he hissed. His whisper was extremely damp. Fred, I have bad news. I have bad feelings. What? Fred jerked awake, searching for Max's face in the dark. I have a bad feeling, said Max. A lot of bad feelings. Shh, Max, what are you scared of? Max's voice was whiny, but there was real fear in it. There's something coming. There's nothing coming, said Fred. You're probably dreaming about the caiman. He listened. The forest was never still. It rustled and insects called and monkeys bellowed all night long, but it didn't sound any louder or quieter than usual. What kind of thing? An animal. It's watching us. Or a monster. I know it. There's no monsters, Max. They're watching. I heard them. The animals are just living their own lives, Max. I promise. They're not interested in us. I can hear them breathing. You don't need to worry. The only thing you need to do is go to sleep. It was dark under the vine roof, but Fred could see that Max's eyes were wide and unconvinced, and his hair was wet with sweat. Can I come and sleep next to you? Fred hesitated. Max was not a quiet sleeper. He thrashed a lot and bit things and farted in his sleep. Please. All right, but please try not to bite me, okay? Yes, said Max. He took a firm hold of Fred's wrist, put it in his mouth, and went to sleep. It was just as Fred was falling asleep that he saw the movement in the trees. He rose to his knees and crossed, keeping low, to the doorway of the stone house. He looked out over the square. Moonlight filtered through the holes in the canopy. Something was watching them, but it wasn't an animal, nor was it a monster. It was the explorer. He was sitting in a low branch, leaning easily against the trunk, knife in hand, keeping guard. So he's really caring for the children, pretending to be this rude explorer that doesn't want them there, but he's sitting up all night, keeping guard off them while they sleep. Okay, the next chapter is called Stuck in the Mud. They woke to rains so heavy that Fred could barely see his own hand when he held it out in front of him. The explorer had left fresh fish outside their doorway, but he was nowhere to be seen. There was only the white, thundering smoke of the rain. It filtered through the roof and dropped on their faces. They crouched, bleak, waiting for it to stop. It did not. They grew steadily wetter. "Let's go and hide under the statues," said Fred. "We can take the fish." They pelted across the square towards the far end, where the 4 vast statues stood. Backer let out a snuffling, mewling sound as Lila ran with him, her feet sliding in the mud. Behind the statues, up against the wall, was a slight overhang, enough to shelter under. They crouched, all 4 in a line, watching the sky and scaling the fish. Fred half expected the explorer to be there too, keeping dry, but there was no trace of him. Fred threw a stone out into the downpour and watched it disappear into the wall of wet. "Shall we do something?" said Lila. She offered Backer a handful of leaves from her pocket. Backer turned away and licked his damp fur. "Let's go looking for food. Or we could play something." Fred put down the fish he was scaling. "Play what?" He was glad to stop working. The rain made the fish slippery, his hands were covered in nicks, and his fingernails were full of fish scales. His fingers, he saw, were calloused now, toughened over the past days. "What game?" said Con. She sounded suspicious. "I only know bridge, and we don't have any cards." "Bridge?" asked Lila. Con looked defensive. "We didn't play much at school. Or at least, sometimes the others did. But I'm not usually—" Her voice trailed off. "I don't really want to. Aren't games for babies?" Sounds like Con didn't have any friends at school. "Do you know Stuck in the Mud?" asked Fred. "It's like tag, only if you get touched, you freeze until someone comes and crawls under your legs to set you free." "Out in that rain?" Con scratched a mosquito bite. "We can't really get that much wetter," said Fred, gesturing to his jersey. It was dripping on the fish. "All right." Con jumped to her feet. "Let's go." "You're it," said Lila to Con. It wasn't like any game of tag Fred had played before. It was more like swimming than running. They darted in and out of statues, slipping on the wet stone. The mud churned under their shoes and spattered all the way up to their waists. Rain got in their eyes and ears and mouths and hammered down on their hands as they tried to lunge at each other. Con ran awkwardly, with her heels hitting against her bottom, but her face was vivid with excitement. "I didn't expect this game," said Con, panting, "to be so literal. I like it." They ran outwards, towards the trees of the jungle. Fred scrambled up 2 lianas to escape pursuit, one in each hand and his knees around both for balance, until Con lifted Max in her arms and he touched Fred's ankle with the tips of his fingers. "You're stuck," Max called. The rain hammered onto his upturned face and slipped his eyebrows into shape. Con put Max down. She doubled over. "Wait! Fred! Lila! I think I might be dying!" "What?" Lila skidded to a halt, throwing up an arc of mud. "The side of my side! It's burning!" "Like fire?" "Yes!" "And it's hard to breathe?" "Yes!" "That's just a stitch." "What?" "How do you not know what a stitch is?" asked Max. "That's so silly." "Shh, Max," said Lila. She turned, calming Con's deep purple blush with her businesslike nod. "It's just what happens when you run. The best thing you can do is take a fat branch in each hand and make a really strong fist around them." "Right, thank you." "Does that work?" Fred asked. "I've never heard of it." "Yes, it definitely works." Con ran into the rain to find 2 sticks. Lila whispered, "I don't know actually, I just made it up, but it might, if you believe it will. That counts for something." Con reappeared, clutching a stick in each hand, her face pink with the effort of making a fist, straining as if she were trying to lay an egg. She thumped Fred on the shoulder. "You're it!" If ever there is a chance to play tag in the jungle in a tropical storm, it is a chance worth taking. Years later, it would shine for Fred like a gold coin he carried with him. It was the last day of light before their days tore open. Sounds like there's something exciting going to happen. The next chapter is called Max. The screaming was not coming from inside Fred's head. He sat bolt upright and stared around the stone room. Dawn was beginning to break. Con was pushing her hair out of her eyes. Lila was already on her feet. Max was not lying on the stone floor. Max was missing. Fred ran out into the stone square, staring around at the grey light, praying that Max would jump out from behind a tree and stick his tongue out at them. "Max!" shouted Lila. "Maxie, where are you?" "Max!" roared Fred. The screaming stopped, and the silence battered itself against his skin harder than the noise. "Not again," said Con, but there was no lightness in her voice. Then Fred's stomach turned suddenly cold, full of something writhing and maniacal. "Is that him?" He pointed at the sloping wall they had tumbled down to the foot of a tree. There was a bundle lying at its base. Fred sprinted to the bank, but Lila outpaced him, legs working like fury. Max lay in a ball. He was shaking, his spine convulsing against his shirt, and his breathing was rough and erratic. "Max," said Lila. "Max, are you hurt? Can you hear me?" Her hair fell over her brother's face. "Say something!" Max moaned and shook. His lips formed shapes, but he spoke no words. "What's wrong with him?" said Con. "I don't know." Lila gathered up his arms and legs and little body and stumbled forward. "I don't know. Come on." She tripped on a rock and nearly fell on top of him. Fred held out his arms. "Shall I carry him?" "No." She held Max tighter. "Where's the explorer?" she said desperately. Her eyes raked the city. "He'll be working behind the vine curtain," said Fred. Lila turned, shouting as she ran. "Explorer! Hey, you! Where are you?" Bacca was tangled in her hair, clutching at her neck with both arms. She didn't seem to realise the sloth was there. Fred ran after her, followed by Con, who slipped in the rain that glistened on the stones, scrambled up, her knee bleeding, and sprinted faster. Fred reached the vines ahead of Lila and began to push them away, fighting through the dense wall to where he'd seen the explorer disappear. "Help!" he called. "Are you here? It's an emergency!" His voice sounded very small and thin. The vines parted and the explorer stared out. His face was black with anger. "What did I say to you about this place?" "Shut up!" Lila whipped to face him, Max cradled against her chest, her fingers clawing at his skin to hold him as he shook. "Max is sick! You help my brother or I'll kill you!" The explorer's anger vanished. "What happened? Is he dead?" Lila let out a roar, a noise the like of which Fred had never heard. It had blood in it. Saliva flew from her mouth as she backed away. "No, no! Don't you dare come near him if you're going to say he's dead!" She stood, the tallest 4'10" Fred had ever seen, the sloth still on her shoulder like a bird on a pirate king. She blazed. "I apologise. I was startled," said the explorer. "He's not dead. Here, give him to me." Tears poured down Lila's cheeks as she lowered Max into the explorer's arms. "Get a branch from the fire. I need more light," he said. Fred ran to fetch a torch. Lila stood over them, unblinking. The explorer laid Max on the floor. He pulled off his shirt and made a pillow and raised Max's head. He muttered, but didn't open his eyes. The shaking jerked his legs and he had saliva around his mouth. "Is he going to be all right?" asked Lila. "I feel like I've eaten a goblin," said Con. She retched and coughed. "What can we do?" "What's happening to him?" asked Fred. "He's been bitten." "By what?" "Ants." "Ants? Oh, thank God, I thought it was a snake." Con let out a bark of laughter and relief. The explorer shook his head. "A snake would be better. He must have stood on a bullet ant colony." "Bullet ants?" Lila let out a moan. "Aren't they—" She couldn't say the word. "Deadly? They can be, particularly if there are allergies involved. He needs to get to a hospital. They can treat it, but only if he gets there soon." "How soon?" asked Lila. "He will shake for another day, and he'll develop a fever. The fever can't be allowed to last for more than 5 days. A week at most. It will cause the brain to swell." So he's just going to die? That's it?" said Lila. "You're going to let him die? You can't! I'll kill you!" Her face and eyes were wild. "No, of course not." The morning light showed the explorer's face was grey and suddenly ancient. "I won't let him die. Not another." Must be thinking of his son. Fred thought of the explorer's face, that night around the fire as he had talked about love. "How then?" urged Lila. "Let me think," said the explorer. His tone was measured. "No, there's no time to sit and think," said Lila wildly. You don't care, you don't understand. We have to do something now. I do care, in fact. I do understand. He raised Max in his arms and began to rub his hands and feet, trying to quicken the circulation. I told you I had a son. He stood and cradled Max against his chest. Come, this one will not die. But how do we get to the hospital? Said Fred. You said the walk would take a month, said Con. There's another way. What is it? Whatever it is, I'll do it, said Lila. Anything, anything. You fly. Do you think he has fixed the aeroplane that he crashed in all that time ago that he's been working on? We've got about 5 more minutes until 6 o'clock. Let's read a little bit more. This chapter is called Behind the Vines. The explorer passed Max to Lila, one hand under the boy's head. Stay here with him. We'll be quick. No, said Lila. Whatever it is you're planning, I need to know. She rearranged Max in her arms, clumsy with love, cradling him to her. Come on. The explorer opened his mouth as if to argue, then met Lila's eyes and shut it again. He turned to the wall of green foliage. It goes further back than you think, he said. Come, push away the vines, quick. Fred shoved aside a great armful of the lianas, some browned with age, some thick as his wrist. The vines looked too closely woven to have grown that way. Up close it was clear they had been draped from something. They fell, uniform, an impenetrable curtain. Did this grow here, or did you plant it? Panted Fred as he pulled at the vines. It felt like trying to climb through a hedge. I planted it, plaited it, pruned it. It is worth having a secret space. The explorer pushed past Fred, pulling out his machete. He hacked through the foliage. Almost through. He widened a space and held back the vines for Lila. She shifted Max so the boy's head rested on her shoulder. Then she stepped through. Fred heard her gasp. He pushed aside the final layer of tendrils and creepers. He stopped short. The vines fell from the roof of a large, three-sided stone room. It was built in similar stone to their sleeping room, but with its ceiling almost intact. It was as high as a cathedral, and it smelt of moss and quiet growing things. The walls were covered in vines, and something had made a nest in the far corner, a ball of grass and feathers. And in the middle of the bare earth floor, something shone yellow and chrome in the green light. An aeroplane, breathed Fred. Precisely. The explorer strode towards the plane. Come, quickly. They edged forward, clumped together, Lila's arms tight around her brother. Here she is. The explorer thumped the side of the plane. It was small, with 2 seats set one behind the other. But you said it burned, said Fred. I did not. You assumed that. I said there was a fire, which is not the same thing. I was on a recce when she started to choke. We crash-landed through the canopy, straight onto the stone city. Saved my life. It took 5 years to repair her. Very slowly, Con put out a hand and stroked the wing of the plane. I've been keeping the boulevard between the trees clear of grass ever since I came, just in case. It will make a good runway. He stopped, corrected himself. It will make an adequate runway, I hope. We're going to fly home, said Con. Her eyes were shining. I am not. I can no longer fly. He smacked his wounded leg. You need both feet to fly a plane. You will fly. You want us to fly a plane? Asked Fred. Well, not all 3 of you. 1 of you. No, said Con. Never. Not possible. Absolutely not. We've already been in 1 plane crash. Have you any idea what the odds are on surviving 2? What else are you planning to do? Con looked at Max. She looked at the plane. It's much simpler to fly than you think, said the explorer. Max gave a moan and struggled in Lila's arms. There is enough fuel for 1 brief lesson and the journey to the hospital. Which of you will fly? Lila? As Max is your brother, you have first rights to it. I can't, said Lila. Her eyes were full of tears. I would, but I can't breathe when I'm near heights. Con? Said the explorer. Fred? Absolutely no way in the world, said Con. I don't want to kill us all. The explorer looked at Fred. Fred looked at the plane. His insides were growing hot with the hope of it and cold with fear. His fingertips began to quiver. His ears were ringing. I can't, he said. Why not? Asked the explorer. The thing that makes driving dangerous is the other drivers. There will be no other planes. On one lesson? You will have to learn fast. What if I crash? Fred asked. You will have to refrain from doing so, said the explorer. But you have not, I notice, said you won't. You have said only that you can't. I say you can. Fred, said Lila. Her eyes met his. Fred had never seen a person look at once so frightened and so brave. All right, said Fred. I'll try. Of course you will, said the explorer. Lila and I will make Max comfortable. I'll return in an hour. I expect you to be waiting here. The explorer held out his arms to take Max, but Lila clutched him close to her chest. I'm coming with you, said Con. I could be useful. I care for my great-aunt when she's sick. Don't waste time, said the explorer to Fred. Climb into the front seat and get a feel for the controls, but don't press the black button. That's the starter. I do not recommend you try to fly through stone. And they turned, leaving Fred alone in the great stone cathedral with the waiting aeroplane. And we're going to leave it for there today. The next chapter is called The Green Sky, and it looks really exciting. That's the cockpit of the plane, look. Sounds like the next chapter is going to be really, really good, doesn't it? Thank you for tuning in, and hopefully you enjoyed that, and I will see you on Friday at 5:30. Bye.